In the previous video, we created a variable called myAge, and we stored the value of 30 to it. Variables, even ones as simple as this one, are useful because now instead of using the literal value of 30 in our code, we can use the variable itself and it will represent the value that is stored inside of it. Let's look at an example. Imagine you have a birthday and you become a year older. Congrats, right? You could express that in code like this, myAge plus 1. Now you may be thinking to yourself, but Ryan, making that variable and typing out myAge equals 30 seems like a lot more work than just using the number 30 directly. So what's the point of using a variable here? The biggest reason why variables are going to be so critical in the code that we write is that we're going to store a lot more than just simple numbers like the number 30 to variables. Here are some examples of other kinds of values that we will be storing to variables in later lessons. Now, we've already used integers like the number 30, but very soon we'll learn about another way of representing numbers called floats. We'll learn how to store text to variables in the form of what are called strings, but also there's booleans, lists, tuples, dictionaries, objects, data frames, right? And a whole host of other kinds of values that we'll be storing to variables. In fact, as data scientists, we often store entire data sets within a single variable. Imagine what a pain it would be if you had to type out your entire data set anytime you wanted to do something with it. It is much easier to store our data within a variable and then perform operations using that variable. At a minimum, this is going to save us a lot of typing. Another big reason why variables are so important is that by giving our variables good names, we can make it easier for others to understand what our code is doing. This is called readability. If your code has high readability, that means that it's easier for others to understand what your code is doing when they read through it. What if instead of saying myAge plus 1, we had instead used the literal value of 30 and our code was 30 plus 1? This line of code could refer to anything. 30 plus 1 could be the number of potato chips I've eaten while writing the script for this video. It could represent the number of students in a class when somebody new moves in, or a million other things. The expression itself just doesn't do a very good job at conveying any context about what it's doing, why it exists, why it's there, etc. Now, imagine instead that the line of code was this, kids in family plus 1. Because of this variable name, this line of code means something very different to the reader than, for example, this line of code, number of ex-wives plus 1, right? Both very simple expressions, but the variable names make those two lines of code pretty distinct, pretty different, and have different meanings to the reader. Descriptive variable names give helpful context about what our code is doing, and it makes our code more readable. It makes it easier for the person who's reading it to understand what it's doing at a glance. Having readable code is often more important than the number of lines of code that we write. It's more important than how fast our code runs. Readable code is easier to maintain, and it makes it easier for both your colleagues, but also future you, most importantly, when you come back to look at your code later, to make sense of what you've done. You're going to be reading code more often than you will be writing it. So I hope you can see just how important it is to use descriptive variable names and have readable code. However, unfortunately, we can't name a variable absolutely anything that we want. There are some small restrictions, which we'll go over in the next lesson.